Good evening. I hope you are well, and thank you for joining us this evening. I am Brother Dr. Jeffrey Sterling, Surgeon General for Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and welcome to this next edition of the Surgeon General's Initiative. On behalf of Brother Dr. Willis Lonzer III, the General President of Alpha Phi Alpha, the Board of Directors, and the Deputy Surgeon Generals, and the team that constitutes our Surgeon General Initiative, I'm glad that you're here tonight because this is something that we really do need to be thinking about at this point in time. We are aging, and life expectancy is increasing to the point to where we should be worried about just how it is we age. Tonight's conversation is going to be on Alzheimer's disease, which is a form of dementia. In fact, it's the most common form of dementia, but it does not represent normal aging. So this is something that you should be concerned about because the overall rate of Alzheimer's disease this millennium has increased by about 150% over this past generation. And as these things go, Blacks have 2 times the rate of developing Alzheimer's disease than the general population. So this is something you should be concerned about, both as a disease entity itself and in the context of how you want to age and how you can age normally compared to what it is Alzheimer's disease represents. To that end, we welcome back as tonight's moderator, Alpha Phi Alpha's Deputy Surgeon General for Family Health. Brother Dr. Victor Narcisse is a spring 1990 initiate of the Rho Iota chapter of Alpha, and he is currently active in Alpha Eta Lambda chapter. He practices at the Houston Methodist Hospital and is the Associate Division Head of Hospital Medicine. He's also the Director of Clinical Research in the Division of Hospitalist Medicine. Dr. Narcisse is board certified in internal medicine and geriatric medicine, and he is a fellow of the American College of Physicians and the Society of Hospital Medicine. Welcome, Brother Dr. Narcisse. Look forward to the show.
Thank you. Tonight, we want to talk about a disease that has touched so many lives, and I've seen professionally and seen personally, and that's called Alzheimer's disease. My professional connection is at work, obviously, but I also have spent a lot of my activism in the community as the president of the board of directors of the Houston Southeast Texas chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. Alzheimer's has continued to grow in significance as our population is aging. Alzheimer's has increased as a cause of death, and now has, over the last 2 decades, has increased by 146%. About 11% of individuals over the age of 65 have Alzheimer's disease. If you're over the age of 80 or 85, it's closer to 50%. We spend as a society in the United States about $320 billion a year in Alzheimer's disease care. And if you compare that for 5 years of care at the end of life for heart disease, about 175,000, cancer, about 173,000, dementia care, 287,000. So it's a tremendous financial burden to our society, our community, even if you don't believe that you have someone in your life who's affected by Alzheimer's. This, again, is very different than normal aging. Everyone has a process where they don't remember things quite as well as they did when they were younger, but typically you're able to preserve function. And that's sort of the key difference. Memory, everyone has trouble remembering exactly where did I put those keys. And if you didn't put it in the microwave, didn't put them in the refrigerator, maybe you're okay. But it's when your function is affected, and now you're having more trouble driving, more trouble walking, more trouble paying bills, that you're really struggling with the type of problems that we think are so important. Again, dementia is a problem with memory, thinking, and judgment that's bad enough that it impairs normal activities of living. Again, very different than normal aging. Alzheimer's disease is about 50 to 75% of all cases of dementia in the United States. And as we've heard, if you're Hispanic, about 1.5 times as likely. If you're African American, about twice as likely to have Alzheimer's disease than the general population. And unfortunately, like so many cases, we have disparities in the incidence, the prevalence, the diagnosis, and survival. And as a result, there's a special interest that I and so many others have had on how Alzheimer's disease and the African American community connect. And I think many of us are very familiar with the challenges that the African American community has with the medical community overall, the research history that the African American communities had with the scientific community, and as a result, uh, when we are even more likely to have trouble, we are even less likely to get help. So it's even more important in an environment where African Americans are more likely to delay or forego care. They're likely to be excluded from medical research. They have worse health outcomes with death, disability. They have more morbidity, mortality. It's really important to understand and to discuss Alzheimer's disease in our community. And if you have a family like my own, people felt that if you spoke about Alzheimer's disease out loud, maybe you would get it. So there was even uh, an unwillingness to discuss it. And so to help us with this, I wanted to bring an award-winning playwright, writer, teacher, speaker to the audience. Garrett Davis is a brother of Alpha Phi Alpha who was made at Epsilon Zeta chapter at Fayetteville State University, where he received a bachelor's in speech and theater. He also achieved a teaching certificate at North Carolina Central University. He is the CEO and founder of G. Davis Productions. G. Davis Productions, if you haven't had the opportunity, is an urban theater and film company. It tours stage plays, creates short films, award-winning productions. It's been doing that since the mid-90s, when most of us were thinking about things that were much less important. And as a result of the work, he's won numerous awards, bringing real-life situations to the stage, telling inspiring stories through the life experiences of his stories. I'd like to thank Brother Davis for coming this evening.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and this is a worthwhile cause, and I appreciate the brothers for taking the time to kind of make sure we get the message out to our people.
You know, when you're in science and you're in healthcare, we don't really think about the theater as being the way to reach out. What got this idea of advocacy through your performance art as something that you were interested in?
I think people learn differently. I think that, my mother has Alzheimer's disease. My grandmother died from Alzheimer's disease. So if I put myself in the place of someone who's taking care of someone with Alzheimer's, the last thing I want to do is see an Alzheimer's play or talk to anyone about Alzheimer's, because I'm dealing with it all day. But if I was to go to the theater, and not knowing that the play was about Alzheimer's, and within that play, it was entertaining. Within that play, I found out some information about Alzheimer's, and it made me look at some things differently. Well, now the next time I go to the doctor, or the next time I have a conversation with a family member, I'm looking at things a little bit differently. And I think theater has a way of letting you see yourself and people similar on stage. You get to kind of step outside of the situation, and people learn differently. And so, we may not pick up a book and read it. We may not go to a seminar, but, entertainment is a big part of our culture. And so, having that respite, going to see a play, and, it can kind of bring up some things that you need to do. So that was the whole idea behind it. And it just kind of morphed from there.
Well, I've had an opportunity to see one of your more recent productions when it was in Houston, and I was thoroughly impressed and pleasantly surprised at how informative it was, even for myself, in really speaking to the human condition and really speaking to the emotions that the actors were bringing to the lives of our audience and to the people that I see every day. Why did you get into theater originally? This is such an incredible thing to do.
Well, my degree is speech and theater, and originally I wanted to be a speech pathologist or own my own radio station. And what happened, brother, was I ended up writing a play, and that play just started taking me around the world. The first play I wrote in 1994, and it was one play after another. And the next thing I know, I'm on tour. And so theater has always been a big part of my life. But what I didn't the health component was not something that I started off doing. I was writing plays on relationships and things of that nature. But my mentor, Deborah Tyler Horton, who was with AARP, I wrote a play when my grandmother had Alzheimer's. I wrote a play called Forget Me Not. And that play was the kind of, closure for me. It was therapy. And that one play literally, brother, took me around the world, from the White House to Congress to being an ambassador with the Alzheimer's Association. And I saw the power of informing our people through theater when I did Forget Me Not. That's one of the longest running urban stage plays in the country, 12 years and counting. And 2 years ago, I met Beverly Berry and Dr. Hill with the Alzheimer's Association with Diversity, Equity, Inclusion. And we decided to do another production because, Forget Me Not had been touring for 12 years. So it was, I would say, a little bit dated. And so this time we had a multicultural cast. We had a white, an Hispanic, a black, and we just kind of dealt with real life situations in terms of the difficulty of Alzheimer's disease when it comes to caregiving and the stress of it. And it's been great. And so theater just has a way of just reaching people and letting them see things where they are, if that makes sense.
How else has Forget Me Not evolved into Unforgettable?
Well, Forget Me Not, a good friend of mine, Bernadette Stannis, and a lot of people know her as Thelma from Good Times. We were touring Forget Me Not across the country, doing seminars and workshops and prayer breakfasts, trying to engage communities of color. But that particular play dealt with, I played, the gentleman who had Alzheimer's, but my wife had cancer, and all the attention was on the mother who had cancer. That they'd notice the things that was going on with grandpa. And so by the time they realized it, it was it was kind of too late. And so with Unforgettable, we wanted to talk about clinical trials. We wanted to talk about the importance of African Americans and communities of color taking part in clinical trials. So the storyline in Forget Me Not, we evolved it with Unforgettable to talk about clinical trials, to talk about the stress of caregiving, to talk about, the stigmas associated with it. So we kind of wanted to make sure we, regardless of what color you were, what community you came from, that if you came to see Unforgettable, there was something on that stage that you could relate to.
We believe caregiving is such an important piece. And again, if you live to just over 80, if you've got a significant other, the statistics would say that either you or your partner are going to have Alzheimer's disease. And the statistics also show that caregivers have a shortened life expectancy. And when we control for all the other variables, age, gender, ethnic backgrounds, educational backgrounds, it looks like the caregiving itself is one of the things that has a negative effect on life expectancy. So it's one of the things that that message in your work was really was a powerful moment for me, and it's one that spoke to, I know, many people in the audience. When you sit down to write a play, write a production, how long does that process take?
I don't want to tell all my secrets. It doesn't take as long as you might think, because I've been doing this for 3 decades. Once I come up with an idea, then I consult with professionals. For instance, I'm getting ready to release a play called Mama's Girls, which is stories of 5 sisters from 5 different cities trying to figure out how to take care of their aging mother. And it's going to be, the focus is on caregiving is real. And so basically, once I talk with the professionals like an AARP or an Alzheimer's Association, and we talk about, the initiative that they have and the things that they can offer, we write the storyline around that. So it the process isn't long at all. I want to comment about the caregiver before you ask the next question. One of the reasons I personally think that caregivers, that life expectancy and all of that, let's just take a step back. If my mother, and she does, but if I didn't have all the resources that are available to me through AARP and the Alzheimer's Association, let's just say I'm the average brother whose mother has Alzheimer's disease. One of the reasons I'm going to have a hard time is because I don't look at myself as a caregiver. I look at myself as a son. And so I'm trying to be the best son that I can be to deal with what my mother's going through. So if I'm married, what's going to happen is I'm not going to be the best husband. I'm not going to be the best father. I'm not going to be the best worker, because all of my attention is on trying to be the best son. But what happens in the thing that I want to preach and teach and people to understand, you have to admit that you're a caregiver. Because if you're a caregiver, then you open yourself up to resources that are available to you. But what happens if you don't look at yourself as a caregiver and you're trying to juggle all these things by yourself, at some point you're going to collapse. At some point you're going to get overwhelmed. And then that's when you start making decisions that aren't the best for you or the one that you're taking care of. So I think what happens is, we as people of color, we are proud people. We don't want no one to see mom or dad not in their best light. So we hide things, I'll just call it what it is. We hide things from the public. We keep it hush hush until it gets to the point where we can't take it. And then when it gets to the point where we can't take it, we want the preacher to walk on water. We want the government to give us money. We want everything. But I think if we would take a step back, and that's why I'm writing a book, man, called the 90-Day Journal for New Caregivers, because I think there's a process that you have to start getting used to. You don't get a call in the middle of the night that says you're gonna be a caregiver tomorrow. You get a call that says, meet me at the hospital, mom failed. And then the doctor tells you, well, someone's going to have to stay with mom. Well, who ends up taking care of mom? Whoever lives closest to her. And then your other brothers and sisters tell you what to do. And if there's no structure, you're trying to do the best that you can. So I think that it takes a village, for a caregiver to be able to take care of someone else. So I think one of the things is that when we have to understand that those of us that are caregivers, we have to admit we are caregivers and understand that the role is different now.
I think that you touched on something that that's near to my heart. It's the understanding the warning signs of whether or not somebody has Alzheimer's or dementia, and that's something that it's very difficult. And ironically, the more education you have, the longer it could take to come to realization that something's wrong, because you've got so much extra cognitive cushion. But we really talk about people who have recent memory loss, particularly when that memory loss is affecting your work or your ability to function at home. So someone who's been able to handle the books and pay the bills for all time, and now all of a sudden has trouble misplacing things. We always laugh about the keys. Because in my generation and my parents' generation, whenever somebody can't find the keys, the first thing that everybody's wondering about is, do you have Alzheimer's disease? So we're not talking about misplacing something periodically. We're talking about misplacing things regularly. Problems with language. So again, the more languages that you've learned, you've added more skills to your skill set. Those things that you've added later in life, that you've achieved later in life, ability to do calculus, the ability to do your taxes, the ability to handle complicated financial transactions, the ability to drive a car. Those things are things that we need to watch out for.
Correct. I think, there is a difference between normal aging and the warning signs, and they are so subtle. If mama has never bounced a check in her life, and mama bounces a check, that's a warning sign. It's the thing is, like, if mama's light is on every night at 6 o'clock, you look at it like this: things that disrupt your daily life, that disrupt, we all can walk into Walmart and come out of Walmart and forgot where we parked our car. I mean, I look at the brain like a computer. I mean, just because you forget where you parked your car doesn't mean you have Alzheimer's. You could have been on the phone going into Walmart. You could have been doing a whole lot of things that, when you come back, but, you can't blame that on Alzheimer's disease. However, you try to get in somebody else's car, that's something totally different. If you, accuse someone of stealing from you, I think one of the things I like to tell families to do is, like, during the holidays, brothers and sisters and cousins and aunts all come back home. I think before they disperse and go back to their places where they live, they should sit down as a family and say, have you noticed anything different about mom? Have conversation before you go back. Because a lot of times we don't have those conversations until, an emergency strikes up. And because what happens, it's going to take everyone taking part in the process to help out. So just having those conversations, it could be a family member saying, look, I've noticed something different about mom. She's not not normally doing this, then let's have a conversation with mom. And so, but I think a lot of times we are afraid to have those conversations. We just brush it off. Well, there's, everyone forgets, if that makes sense.
In my Louisiana family, talking about health and health problems is absolutely the last thing that anybody wants to do. Everyone wants to have a very, very proud conversation about their kids and what the things that they're doing and the successes, and no one wants to speak about ill things. And so as a result, it's very difficult to find out about family history. We encourage, whenever there's family gatherings, there should be a conversation about family history. And again, also, as you point out so eloquently, talking about things that are going on, subtle signs that might be present particularly in our older generations. In your productions, you've done a really nice job of speaking to changes in mood, changes in personality, loss of initiative. These are sort of subtle signs that some people might, again, confuse with normal aging. But I think that it's such an important thing to inform our community about, to look for, particularly the person who's been happy and upbeat for a long time, and now they're less. That's an important change. And I think that you've spoken to this so well, and I think probably better than the medical community does in many respects. Yeah. So very thankful.
I think that when it comes to, I always say when I'm giving speeches, brother, and when I'm talking, mama can have 5, but 5 can't take care of 1. And the reason 5 can't take care of 1 is because those 5 hardly ever get on the same page. There's always going to be a primary caregiver. Okay. That primary caregiver is going to be the one who's either the closest one in proximity or the closest one emotionally to mom. And so what happens is that primary caregiver can get upset because her brothers and sisters won't take part. And they get upset because, that's your mama. Why won't you help out? Not understanding that other brother or sister will always have an excuse. If they can't stand to see mom like that, they're going to always have an excuse not to help out. But they will never tell you that they can't see mom like that. And so having those conversations early, before even something comes up, to have conversation with family members, like if something ever happened, guys, what are we going to do? Okay, who's going to be the primary? Now, I know you live in such and such away, since you can't, maybe I can send all the bills to you. Maybe this brother can take care of this. We split the duties up so that primary caregiver is not overwhelmed. And because their primary caregiver has to understand there are going to be times that nobody wants to help you but you. And you can't get upset and get mad. And those are the things that we don't normally get worked out until we're like 2-3 months into it. And now you got brothers and sisters not talking to each other. But that's real. It is so real. And a lot of times, like, in all honesty, when I went home from spring break from Fayetteville State and I saw my grandmother Goodness and she didn't know who I was, brother, I didn't go back home until she died because I could not stand to see her like that. So now, I ran from responsibility. I ran from the mother, the grandmother that reared me, because I didn't want to see her like that. I wasn't there to help out. I wasn't there to do anything. And so, that's one of the biggest regrets of my life. But that's real. How many men want to see their mother and their mother doesn't know who they are, but you're going to take care of them, or your wife. That stuff is real. And so I think that's why it's important to understand what it is and seek out services and help versus being prideful and not getting the help.
I believe that we are essentially a collection of our memories. Mm-hmm. And so when this disease and similar diseases attack the ability to remember things, it really attacks our humanity at a very, very basic level. And it has such ramifications. The African-American community, I think, is even more vulnerable because of the way that the risk factors overlap with the cardiovascular risk factors. So, we often talk about, well, why are African Americans appear to be at higher risk? And we talk about the vascular risk factors a lot: high blood pressure, poorly controlled; diabetes is poorly controlled; high cholesterol; obesity. We spend a lot of time speaking about the Louisiana diet, the New Orleans food that I love so much, that is world famous,
Right.
that is a tourist destination, and not always the best in the portions that we've historically used. And so I think that it's really important to try to recognize these concerns early, and then start to put in place measures to modify our risk. I think that it's when you're seeing these changes, what are you going to do? Where do you take mom? Where do you take dad to get assistance? How do you get help?
Right.
And so we have these conversations a lot, and I'm a big advocate for getting an evaluation, particularly when there are worries. And this is a controversial step. I was just at a meeting last week when one of the national bodies really recommended against doing national screening for Alzheimer's disease, because the treatments are so disappointing in many respects. But I think sitting down and doing a 5, 10, 15, 20-minute pen and paper test and a physical examination with a patient, a little bit of blood work, is something that would benefit many to really understand the risks and to help patients and families plan. And that's the thing that I think that the medical experts who spoke against doing screening really missed the boat on. That if you identify somebody who's at risk, then they might modify their risk factors at an earlier time point.
Right.
They could reach out to family members. They can begin future planning, which I think you've spoken to so eloquently, and can start to talk about research and participation in research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to give a couple of resources out that are very easy, and I think I call this the Bible for caregivers. So if you go to aarp.org, and download the Prepare to Care guide. That Prepare to Care guide, I call it the Bible for caregivers. It lists, how to form a team. It lists how to have those difficult conversations. It even has a section, if you're a new caregiver, about writing down, mama's bills and where is this and where is that. It is a perfect form. It has forms, it has templates. I think it's a perfect tool, aarp.org, and it's called the Prepare to Care guide. I think that is an excellent tool, excellent resource if you're a caregiver. I also want to say too that, if you're not a caregiver, if you know of someone who is, you have a vital role, and I think it's your responsibility. If it's your friend or someone in your family, the thing is, be there for them, because primary caregivers need support too, because they're juggling so many things at one time that they are bound to miss something, and at some point they're going to need someone to talk to. They're going to need someone to kind of break down with. So even if you're not a caregiver, being that support system is so very important for primary caregivers.
That's one of the places that the Alzheimer's Association has done a nice job at. They have a tremendous amount of resources and supports for caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really in the DNA of that organization.
Mm-hmm.
And at alz.org is their national website, and they have both diagnostic resources, but also a lot of caregiving tips and ideas and places to get support.
Look, when it comes to Alzheimer's, there is no other organization that is going to be there for you like alz.org. I mean, I am a big component, not just because I'm an advocate and ambassador for the association, but at the end of the day, they got a 24-hour helpline. A 24-hour helpline that, regardless of what you're going through, you can call and get that support and get that information. So you're right. alz.org is an excellent resource for if you're dealing with someone with Alzheimer's dementia.
One of the things that I get asked a lot is, well, what can I do to prevent getting Alzheimer's disease in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a difficult conversation, but there are some low-hanging fruit that I think are make a lot of common sense. It's not a guarantee, but collectively, the Alzheimer's Association has called the Maintain Your Brain campaign.
Right.
And so protecting your brain from injury. If you're a cyclist, as I've become over the last several years, trying to keep my health up, making sure you have a helmet. If you're in a car, wearing a seatbelt. So avoiding the brain injury, the brain trauma. Your brain health starts with your heart, we often believe. And so we encourage people to know your numbers, to really focus on your body weight and making sure your BMI is where it's supposed to be. Your blood pressure, 120/80, your cholesterol, less than 200, your blood sugar around 100. Those kinds of things are important. Making sure that you're eating less fat in your diet and that you're exercising regularly. I think there's a lot of studies that show that 30 minutes a day of exercise really helps so many different things, but Alzheimer's disease prevention is one of them. And one of the things that you've spoken on in the past is the exercising your brain.
Yeah.
So whether you're reading or writing, Sudoku, crossword puzzles, whatever type of activity works best for you, I think that those are great things. Connecting with others in Louisiana, the meals are so important because that's the way that we connect with so many. But whether it's a meal or not, connecting with folks around leisure activities is important. Avoiding smoking, avoiding excess alcohol, avoiding illicit substances. Those things are important. And the earlier you do these steps in life, the more benefits they seem to have. And so those are common. It's common sense, and it sounds like we're on a record stuck on replay over and over and over again when we say exercise, nutrition, avoidance of toxic substances. But the fact that we say them so often should really speak for so many, and including for myself, as a message that we need to really take command of our lives and take command of our futures, and try to do as many things as we can to avoid the problems down the road.
Yeah, and I don't want people to think that Alzheimer's is an old people disease, because a lot of time I think I'll put that in a myth. That's one of the things you think, like when people are getting old and they forget. People think that's normal. I'm saying, well, they're supposed to forget. They're getting old. Then, because early onset, you could be in your 30s and have Alzheimer's disease. I think as a people, we just need to be a little bit more aware and a little bit more observant, because Alzheimer's is one of those diseases that, it can be in your system 20 years before you see the first symptom. And so I think we just need to start paying attention a little bit more to what's taking place. It used to be we sit around the dinner table and, we would have conversations, and now you have 5 people at a dinner table and 5 cell phones, and no one, like those Sunday conversations. I think we need to kind of just go back to the basics sometimes, and be a little bit more observant, and just look at what's going on around us with our loved ones. When we talk about diet and exercise, one of the things, Dr. Neela Magrawal from Rush Medical Center, she always say, put some color on your plate. Color. Your plate can't be all brown and white. Put some, if you got color, you got fruits and vegetables, so that's important.
I think it is. And I think that you've touched on one of the real challenges, that you could have the pathology of Alzheimer's disease inside of your brain for years and decades before you ever have any symptoms. So that has been one of the major problems with being a physician taking care of patients with Alzheimer's disease, because by the time you have signs and symptoms of problems, you've got a lot of disease in your brain, and you've had it for a long, long time. And so it's very difficult for medications to have a substantial effect. In fact, more than 99.5% of the medicines over the last several decades have failed in clinical trials. My personal suspicion is that because they weren't tried early enough in life, that we need to do these interventions in the 30s and 40s and 50s, not wait until 60s and 70s and 80s. And then the medicines we have, the donepezils, the rivastigmines, the memantines, they have a role to play, an important role to play, but they're just not going to be the magic wands that we would wish them to be.
Right.
In so many respects. My mother was born in Tuskegee, Alabama, and my grandmother often spoke to me as a future physician about her connection to the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. She said she'd go to the market, and she would meet individuals who actually were participants in that trial. So the evils that the medical community has allowed is something that resonates in my own personal life and my own personal family. But what I would say is that research is very different now than it once was. And I think that the African-American community is going to have to take a different approach to research in the future than it has in the past.
They're going to have, and so I know it is depending on, what community you're from and, how deep, whether it's deep South or whatever, when you talk about clinical trials in African-American community, that, that's a touchy subject. And I know what happened with Tuskegee was real. I do. The thing I try to get, our community to understand, because of Tuskegee, things are so different now. And when we say clinical trials, I think we have to understand it's not always putting something in your mouth or putting something in your body. As a people, we need to understand, the different type clinical trials and studies that exist and why and how they can help us. We are quick to say, I don't want to be a guinea pig, but let's just be honest. How many times has grandmama told you to do something? Put this, take this, mix this with that, do this, and take it. That is a clinical trial. Every pill that's in Walmart went through a clinical trial. And so that's why, if everyone who's listening to us, brother, if we said who has a headache and what do you take? Everybody takes something different. Everybody doesn't take BC. Everybody doesn't take a Bayer. Everybody doesn't take an Advil. Everybody doesn't take a Motrin. There's a reason for that. So I would hate for them to come up with a cure for Alzheimer's disease, and it doesn't work in African Americans or communities of color because we're stuck on being afraid of clinical trials and to participate. So how can a drug work in us if it's not tested in us? Then we're hoping. And so I think as a community, we have to understand, yes, Tuskegee happened, but let's make sure we educate everyone and understand what is a clinical trial, what is a study, if that makes sense.
One of the things that's happened in science over the last several decades has been what we call targeted therapy or specific therapy. And so the pills, like the cholesterol medicines that we give to so many individuals, work on a mechanism that's present in most people. But increasingly, the types of medicines that are being studied are antibody-based treatment trials that target very, very specific points in a mechanism, very, very specific genotypes, and it's not clear that the medicines in the future, and this goes for all medicines, for all diseases, if they will work in different populations the same way. And as we've studied the medicines and with the mechanisms that we've had around for decades, we're increasingly seeing differences in metabolism and processing of these drugs. We're going to expect similar kinds of results, maybe even more significant results in the newest of medicines. There are two relatively new medicines on the market that have been in the lay press. Aducanumab has been around for about a year. That had some that got through the fast track approval from the FDA. Lecanemab is the most recent one that has gone through some of its initial phases of trial and is available particularly in research centers and clinic and large groups that are studying these agents. It's not clear that these will be paid for by Medicare, Medicaid, or commercial insurances yet. And these are, $30,000 a year kinds of treatments. So there's a lot of reason to be excited about agents like this, and we're using in the Alzheimer's community the availability of these new medications as a reason to have a conversation with your physician. If your physician isn't comfortable to go and speak to a specialized center who does research, even if they're not going to do research on you, but with specialized experts in geriatrics, as I am, geriatric psychiatry, neurology, these kinds of physicians are more comfortable with these medications in many respects, and have a conversation about risk benefits, what to look for. Are these types of medicines right for you as an individual? Maybe it is, maybe it's not, but I think it's worthy to have a conversation. And again, the idea that there are new medications that are being tested all the time, I think is a reason for excitement, not for despair.
Yeah, I think it is a reason for excitement. I think, for those of us in the Alzheimer's community and the fight to try to get a cure for this disease, this is a breakthrough, but we still have work to do because, like you said, is not offered through Medicare and Medicaid right now. And so to me, that doesn't help all of us. And so there's always a fight in trying to make sure that that playing field is even. But we can't get comfortable. You know what I'm saying? I don't want our community to be the ones sitting on the side waiting for something to happen. And then when it happens, we hope that, what's done is going to help us out. I think we need to take part. We have to get engaged. And you said something like something as simple as when we go to the doctor. We all know that if mom or dad is showing signs of Alzheimer's disease, I think, the ones that are taking them to the doctor need to be educated on how to have those conversations, because it's difficult to have that conversation in front of your mother or father about them. And so, the thing is, you need to have a relationship with your doctor so that some of these things can be talked about before you even get there. Okay. And it's because at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that there's an assessment done properly versus, not having, because, to be honest with you, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, brother, was watching my mother go through a test and then her looking at me after she gave her answers as if, did I say the right thing? And even though she did not say the right thing, I had to keep a straight face because I didn't want her to feel as though she was letting me down or something was wrong with her. You know what I'm saying? So I think, those conversations, having someone from the Alzheimer's Association, available to talk you through, this process. This is not something that you need to try and go alone if you have no experience doing it.
I would actually take it a step further and even say that the healthcare community has a duty to our community to reach out and to engage us where we are.
Mm-hmm.
And, again, we've spoken a lot tonight about things that I think that you think that our community can do for ourselves. I also think that the healthcare community, the research community, needs to reach out in a more inclusive way, to come and speak to our church groups, to our fraternal and community organizations. Whether you're talking about recruiting for a clinical trial or just signing up for your annual enrollment for your insurance, I think that the healthcare community needs to speak to our community members where our community members are. And so one of the things has both been a revelation, and I hope it doesn't become a tagline or a meme, is the healthcare worker, the physician, the nurse practitioner is going out to the barbershop to talk to people about concerns. And I think that that's a great example of a place where people gather, where people get together and have some time and are accustomed to sharing about their lives and the healthcare community can learn much from attending such a gathering. Initially, not necessarily with an ask, but with a list to listen.
Yeah.
And I'm hopeful that with the diversity initiatives that we've seen around so many communities, I hope that the healthcare community will spend more time listening to people who look like myself and to so many others.
Right.
I think that that's a key piece. And I think that if the goal is getting folks to come into the office for a health visit, if your goal is to get people to come and talk about research, if your goal is to come in and get to talk about nutrition and exercise, I think going to where the community is a lot better than trying to drag the community into the Texas Medical Center where I work every day, and where my colleagues pay a gargantuan sum of money every day to park. Complicated. The Texas Medical Center, if you haven't been there, thousands of hospital beds, hundreds, thousands of providers, just tremendous mecca of healthcare delivery. But because it's so centralized, it's difficult for people to access. Particularly those who have the most trouble with transportation and wayfinding, and someone who's confused, someone who can't remember. And so the patients who have Alzheimer's and their families struggle bringing their patients into a place where I work until things are at the most desperate of circumstances. So I really encourage the community to reach out. And if your health community has not been reaching out, I think you should speak to your physician, speak to your health system, and ask, request, and just shy of demand that they do.
Right.
I've been watching the chat and hearing so many different stories about individuals and their experiences. It seems as though the story of caregiving is one that's fairly universal, and it touches so many different people, so many different ages, so many different geographies, and it's such a big part of it. Again, that's the I consider myself an expert on Alzheimer's disease in many respects, but the emotional portion of the caregiving was so poignantly spoken in your work. I hope that that's something that you're going to be able to bring to your future work.
Yeah, I'm always working on, trying to creatively create projects and that can educate our people in an entertaining way. I want to talk about, when you talk about caregiving, one of the things that I think gets overlooked in communities, let's just say you got mom, dad, and a son or daughter who are 15 or 16 or younger. And if grandma's living with them, a lot of times those grandkids get thrown into caregiving duties with, as whether they want to or not. And so now you got millennials, because we're living in this sandwich generation. Now you've got millennials, you got young people playing a heavy caregiver role. And what's taking place, what conversations are taking place with those young kids in terms of, are they babysitting or are they caregiving? Because there's a difference. Because if they're babysitting, they're just watching, making sure nothing happens. But, what if there's some other things that are needed? So I think, again, that whole family dynamic, I think, needs to come back to have conversations. So, if I've got a young person looking at grandma, then it's like, I need to sit down with that young person and tell them, okay, you are a caregiver now, and this is why we need you to do A, B, C, D. And this is one of the things I want you to look out for. Okay. And so when I come back, let's have a conversation. What took place? It's not just, watch grandma while I'm gone. You know what I'm saying? So I think, those conversations really need to take place, as opposed to throwing them into the fire, to do what I say do. There needs to be more conversations around that for young people.
One of the things that the Alzheimer's Association has done very well in the Houston community has been training for caregivers. And I'm so impressed with that because the patience that's required to be a caregiver is something this just shy of sainthood
Mm-hmm.
in many respects, and trying to provide realistic goals and have the caregivers understand what the future looks like is something that's so important. But additionally, you've spoken about the sandwich generation piece, and trying to make sure that we take care of the caregiver is something that I think is so important. It's not an uncommon thing when you take care of patients that somebody will break down and share their emotions with you. But one of the things that I see so commonly is when I see someone who's having caregiver stress, and I tell them, what you really need to do is take an hour this day and go and take care of yourself. Get some your own wellness, whether that's a walk in the park, or whether that's getting hair, nails done, or whether it's getting on the phone and speaking to a family member that you haven't had an opportunity to because you're so busy. These things are so important. And also trying to understand some of the caregiving behavior tips. I see so many families, particularly early on in the disease, who will argue with the patient who's got Alzheimer's disease to try to convince them that it really is 2023, and no, you're not in Wisconsin, you're in Texas, or wherever you are, because they're remembering a different time in a different place. And the same conversation that we had for the healthcare system, I encourage caregivers to go to where the patient is and not try to re-educate them of every small detail, particularly as the disease gets more advanced.
But see, that to me, that is an example of the caregiver not understanding they're a caregiver. They're still a son, they're still a daughter, they're still a brother, they're still a sister, a husband or wife. They're not haven't taken on that role as a caregiver, because if you take on the role as a caregiver, you know that they're not capable of stepping inside your world anymore. Okay. But if you're not a caregiver, you're trying to convince them, Mom, I just told you that last week. Mama, you know that does. And so Mama doesn't know. And the only reason you're having those conversations is because you have not taken on the role as a caregiver. You're still trying to be the son or the daughter or whoever, and you're trying to get mom or dad to do something they cannot do anymore. And so the frustration is caused by you. The stress is caused by you, because you're trying to get them to do something that they're not capable of doing. And that's not right.
I see so many individuals who will argue at a different language level than the patient can comprehend. And so I think that the idea of understanding the disease early on, understanding what's going on, what's happening, is more than just getting a pill. I think it's reorganizing your life, financially, your time, getting some training, making sure the house is set up in a way that's going to be successful for the patient. And I think that's these things are so important, and that's why I'm such a big proponent of getting screening and getting a diagnosis, even when that diagnosis may not lead to a medicine today that will change the disease in dramatic ways.
Exactly.
The traditional medicines we have been on the market for a long time, and they're helpful. They have a tremendous role, but they're not wizardry. They're not magic. And frankly, if they were antibiotic, they wouldn't have come to market.
Right.
We just don't have the same levels of expectations. But again, if you can recognize and realize, prepare, educate yourself, I think it makes a huge difference. A huge difference in the experience and in life. While we talk about exercise for the patient, we talk about exercise for the caregiver, exercise for the doctor. I wanted to give you an opportunity to wrap up and share some final thoughts on the disease and on your future work in healthcare advocacy.
Alzheimer's is a disease, is an ugly disease. It strips you of your dignity. It can push you into seclusion. It can break up a family. I mean, it is what it is, because we are a proud people and we don't want our loved ones to be seen in that light. So I challenge and I implore all of my people that if you think that you're going to be dealing with someone with Alzheimer's in your family, reach out. Everybody needs somebody. This is something that you cannot do by yourself. It's impossible. Okay. It is impossible to try to take this load on by yourself. Reach out to the Alzheimer's Association, alz.org. Reach out to them. They're available to you 24 hours a day. Reach out to a family member. Reach out to your friends. Reach out to your church. Do not try to attempt to take this on by yourself. Some of the things that we're working on, you can go to Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, or your mobile device to the App Store and download G Davis TV. It's a free app. And on that app, we have drama series that deal with Alzheimer's, that deal with caregiving, from Mama's Girls to Daddy's Boys to Unforgettable. And you can see these televised shows. We have talk shows that we're going to be placing on there that deal with caring for a loved one inside home, all those things. So we are committed to trying to make sure that we spread the word and expose everything that we're doing in terms of, leading people to resources that can help them. And so I, invite you to download G Davis TV on your mobile device and stream it on Roku, Amazon Fire, and Apple TV to see all the entertainment programs that we have dealing with these subject matters.
G Davis TV sounds like a great thing to look into.
Mm-hmm.
Earlier this year, I went to a performance. I thought it was going to be a stage play, something we're going to do for the afternoon. I don't think I appreciated how deep a story it was, how influential an experience it was. And so if you have not had the opportunity to see a Garrett Davis production, I think that you would be well served to do so. It will change your perspective in ways small, medium, and large. Alzheimer's disease is something that affects so many problems with memory, thinking, and judgment. And I encourage each and every one of you to know your numbers, and so that you can take every advantage of prevention strategies. I would encourage those who are worried about having symptoms to reach out and get screened, to talk to your physician and perhaps even a specialist about medication options, research options. Don't be afraid to participate in research trials. Maybe the trial is just a behavior trial and looking at more things that we can do in our daily lives that might limit our activities, limit our exposure to Alzheimer's disease. Maybe it's more opportunities for screen time. Maybe it's less opportunity for screen time. It's hard to know, but I encourage everyone to look at that and participate. The Surgeon General Initiative is brought to you from the vision of Brother Jeffrey Sterling that you met earlier. He's our Surgeon General, and his vision of bringing healthcare education to our brothers and to our community is something that has been unique in the fraternal space. And if it's something that's interesting to you, reach out to us. We will continue to try to produce experiences like this. Next week, the same time, 6 Central, we'll be talking about increasing life expectancy. And again, it will be our own Surgeon General, Brother Sterling, who's going to be speaking on this topic. I encourage each of you to have a blessed evening, stay safe, and make sure that you're reaching out and helping each other. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.
Great job.